A drug on the market. At a Conservative Party conference some years ago, there was available to members of the press, the Tory party and the public the peculiar sight of a man marching up and down in front of the main entrance to the conference hall, bearing a placard. On one side of his banner were written the charming and gracious words, "Repatriate all immigrants now." Ah, you might think, I've got his number, the unacceptable face of unacceptability. I wonder, though, if you can guess what motto was emblazoned on the obverse of his pennant. If you know something of the weird logic of right-wing libertarianism, you might be able to make a stab at it. Press the pause button and have a think for a few moments. Time's up. If you divine this correctly, you either share this man's political outlook, or you are a sophisticated and knowledgeable social observer, for what was written on the other side of the conference-goer's banner was this: "Legalize cannabis, now." The legalization of cannabis has long been an interesting cause. The report compiled by Baroness Wootton of Abinger at least 20 years ago found nothing wrong with the drug and seemed to recommend its decriminalization. Speaking as one who grew up bombarded by anti-drug literature, films and homilies, I have long felt that the strategies used by those who wish to discourage the use of prohibited narcotics have been hopelessly misguided. If drug users are consistently shown to the impressionable young as spotty, vomiting, reeling and incoherent, there is, I concede, no doubt that the idea of drugs loses its appeal. The truth, however, is so much less straightforward. Any young person nowadays is bound to bump into a drug user of some kind during their life. I can well remember the first time I met someone who, I was told in an excited whisper, was a genuine junkie, and had been for years. Imagine my surprise when I saw that his skin tissues were clear, his hair glossy, his eyes bright, his speech well modulated and unslurred, and his behaviour irreproachable. All those warning films, those stern lectures from visiting policemen, and those frightening pamphlets that had been from prep school onwards thrust at one, they had been no more than sensational and hysterical propaganda. The feeling of having been conspired against by a killjoy older generation was very strong indeed, and tended, if anything, to turn one towards the forbidden fruit of the poppy, now that it was clear that it was not as grotesque as we had been warned. There is a famous story of a television documentary made only a few years ago about a group of heroin addicts. They were in middle age, prosperous and successful. They had been junkies for 22 years. Their behaviour, appearance and mode of life was utterly normal, irreproachable and unexciting. The documentary was never broadcast for fear of seeming to show that drug addiction need not be the nightmare that we spend so much money and time assuring our younger generations that it is. The truth is this: if you want to witness blotchy skin, yellowing eyes, incoherent mumbling, uncoordinated staggering, stumbling and retching, then don't look for a junkie, look for a drinker. One of the great unspoken secrets of our age and ages previous is the prevalence of alcoholism in public and private life. We allow a few joke drunks to stand as our butts, Oliver Reed, George Brown, George Best and so on, but we ignore the fact that a very large percentage of journalists, politicians, writers, jurists, judges, financiers and civil servants drink to an extent that would lead any doctor to describe them as functional alcoholics. Alcohol is a much more dangerous drug than many that are proscribed. Rich alcoholics, like rich junkies, can last for years on fairly good quality stuff. It is the poor and ill-educated drinkers and drug addicts who stumble down the streets, pick fights, steal, vandalize, and decline to vagrancy and degradation. The ancient Greeks used to say that wine is the mirror of the soul. Only a fool blames a mirror if the image it offers is not to their liking. To prohibit alcohol simply because some can't cope with it would strike most of us as ludicrous and intolerable. To do the same to certain narcotics might be regarded as just as foolish and oppressive. We know that the arguments for decriminalization are growing amongst doctors and members of the governmental and non-governmental organizations responsible for fighting the vast bandit organizations that profit like bootleggers from the illegality of heroin, cocaine and marijuana. Sobriety is a chemically induced state of mind that many find bearable for only short periods of the day. In heaven, I suspect, they drink well and wisely. On earth, we must face up not to alcohol abuse, but to the abuse of people's lives that leads them to drink badly. To the educated drinker, the prohibition of a good Islay malt or a Chateau Margaux would be a crime against nature's bounty and man's artistry. The same may be said by the connoisseur of best Andean flake cocaine or Moroccan gold cannabis. You don't, unless you are mad, solve the problems of burglary by outlawing possessions. 1991 approaches, and I must dash to the shops, as I'm sure must you, to get hold of a few hundred units of alcohol with which properly to welcome it in. Your very good health.